I really have done entire trainings, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, now I have to do it again. Okay, so yeah, so in this call, so in the last call, in the last couple calls, we were discussing how to resolve um issues with losing people in ministries because of how we're structuring our flow of resources. And a lot of times we structure the resources to go out to the masses, but the masses have an infinite amount of need. And so they can just drain the resources to zero, and they don't have any commitment. And so what's happening there, and this is kind of the summary of what we came to, what's happening there is you're incentivizing the people outside the ministry to not commit to the ministry because you're giving them everything for free. And then the people inside the ministry, you're de-incentivizing from commitment because they're working and helping and volunteering, but they don't get anything because all the resources are going to the people. So you're de-incentivizing them from commitment, and then you're sending them out, which is where the resources go. Um, so it's kind of a backwards model in ministries with in regard to basic resource allocation. So, and Michael, I don't know if you recall, and it's been a while, but did we ever talk about kind of Jesus and how he had the three, the 12, the 72, and the masses? Did we get into that at any point?
Not that I can
Maybe not.
remember.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
basic point being, Jesus gave time and attention and energy and resources to the masses, but the vast majority of his attention is spent on the three and then the 12 because he lived with them. They committed their life to him, but he in return committed his life and teaching and training to them. So I was explaining to Karen last week at ClickMill, I spend a lot of time and put a lot of videos out on YouTube and all this, but the primary people that I'm focused on are first the interns, because you guys like live with me online basically, and give me a year or 6 months or a year of your life. And so I need to make sure you get the most value, because what are you going to come and work for free for a year? That's crazy. You've got to have benefits, like you're working with another marketing agency now. You've started your own, um, you know, websites with affiliate deals you're working out, and try to so make sure that those people are getting the most resources first, and then it's less and less the less committed those people are to your ministry. And Jesus even says as much. He said, if you're going to follow me, you've got to be willing to lose everything. But those are the people he commits the most to in regard to resources. So anyway, that's what we looked at last week. And this week, I want to get more into resource allocation for your ministry, Pastor Karen. And I want to talk about it, and I'm going to bring with it sort of a macroeconomic perspective. And one of the things we've talked about natural revelation and how God created an orderly world. And while the Bible obviously is the word of God and inerrant and all that, that is the lens through which we view everything. We also can learn about God and learn about how he wanted us to live and function by just observing his creation and how things work best. And one of the things my mentor always says is sort of his base for making decisions is it biblical, and does it function better than what I'm doing now? Does it create better fruit than what I'm doing now? Because he's like, my job is to live a Christian life, but it's to live a Christian life that is the most fruitful I can live. And he applies that to all areas of his life. And so with that, as we're discussing resource allocation and where we're investing our efforts, and so again, resources are going to be the base things you have to invest. And so you can hear the macroeconomics there. What do we have to invest? Well, a lot of people just immediately go to money, and that's really one of the least valuable things, because nobody has money when you start a ministry. Everybody's broke. You don't need money to make a great ministry or business. So money is one, financial resources, but the more important ones are time, and time being the most valuable resource you have because it's limited. It doesn't come back every day. You can always get more money. You can't get more time, and you don't even know how much you have. So that is a very big resource. And that's what investors and entrepreneurs will say. Like you start out with no money, but as you put the time in, you start getting more money than you need, and then you're like, oh my gosh, what is the money for? It's to buy back the time. So as your money goes down, I would say you start out with lots of time and no money. And this is also, Michael, what Daniel, my mentor, explains, and he explained this too. So it's cool just to see a lot of confirmation. But you start out with lots of time and no money, and then your time starts going down and you start making more money. And then what do? You've got no time and you're getting really stressed. You have to exchange some of that money to buy back the time. And so he goes, the more, at least in business and ministry, the more successful you become on a financial front, you use the money to buy the time with your family. He said, the family is the priority, so you have to sacrifice the money to buy back the most important thing, and you continue to do that over and over. And so he goes, you need to hire, you need to get a volunteer, in ministry, you need to sacrifice resources when the most important things are being pushed out and you don't have the time, because the time's the most valuable resource. And then beyond that, you've got other ones, and I'm not going to say there's like a hard and fast list, but you have some amount of physical energy for moving and lifting and doing things every day. And that wears out. By the end of the day, we're like, our body is tired. You have some amount of like mental energy. And I'm not saying that in any kind of spiritual way. I just mean like you can focus attention on things. And, if you are like a brainiac like me, you know that you can only read a book for so long, and you can still go do stuff, but your thinking is just tired. Decisions are also a resource. When people are really high performers and they sort of get to the point where their whole job is making decisions, and you can think, as you have more and more money and you're hiring and you're delegating work, you do less of the day to day and you do more decision making. So really at some point, as you build, your job just becomes a decision maker. Well, decision making, as we talked about last week, Pastor Karen, decision comes from the word scissio in the Latin, and scissio is incision or scissors. It means to cut off from. And so what you're doing is you're just literally being an expert at strategic sacrifice. You're just like, what do I kill today? That's the whole job of decision making. And that is a limited resource, at least on the daily. And you wake up, as long as you're taking good care of yourself, and then you've got more energy and more focus and more decisions to make the next day. But those are things that really run out. Those come back on the daily basis. Time does not renew, and money, you can always get more money. So it might not come back daily, but you can always get more if you have a reason and people really love what you're doing. So those are the resources that we have. And then the question then is, how do we allocate them? And and Karen, I've been reading about growth and working on business, and super exciting. Like our website in the new year went from about 1,000 hits a day. We hit 1,500 hits a day yesterday, which is just crazy town. But the question, or what I have found, the further in I have gone into growth, and what I learned from my mentor, who's obviously light year ahead of me, is it comes down to making decisions and knowing what to cut. And what happens is at the bottom, how do I say this? I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to draw something to kind of explain this. It's kind of a, I don't know, I guess a mental concept, and it's very counterintuitive. So I'm going to do my best on this one. Here, I'm just going to go with a pencil. It kind of, and that's white. Let's try this. Let's try black. Let's go with that. Okay, there we go. So the way this works is this is a terrible drawing. There's the things you can be doing. So down here, there are more things you can be doing, if you can read that. And then there are less things you can be doing. And what happens is, when we start out, you have no opportunities, you have, or few opportunities, And so you just do a lot of things. And when I came into business and I started working ClickMill, I was taking clients where I do like 5 times as much work as I do for a client today. And they had no idea the value. They paid like $200 a month for my top end services because I'm like, I'll take anything to get going. Let's just do it. Massive action. And so I was taking huge projects for $20 a month. And because they paid less, they created so many problems. And they would call me in the middle of the night because they didn't have boundaries, because they just didn't understand the value of what I was doing. And so so I start out with, what do you want to say? Lots of time and no money. And then I have, let's say, 15 of these clients. Now I have no time and some money, but then I have to start figuring out I literally cannot grow anymore at this rate. And so then you have to figure out, what do you do? And so then you have sort of this reverse triangle that's opportunity. So these are things you're doing. I'm not going to write that because it'll take all day with this pencil. You have things you're doing, and then you have a terrible triangle. Then you have opportunity. And I don't really know if this is going to work. Yeah, so you do a lot of things down here, but there's very little, like, what do you want to say? I guess the way I would see it in my own, marketplace ministry here is, I have 50 clients, but they're all sort of really low quality clients, and people who've been in the industry 15, 20 years would never take a client like that. And so as you as you move forward in your ministry, you take less and less and less opportunities, or less and less and less clients, but the type of client you take, or the type of opportunity you take, grows and grows and grows in value. And so now, like one of the clients that we have been onboarding for about 2 or 3 months is a Salvation Army in one particular area. And if that goes well, you can see how that is not, that's not this kind of low quality content. That is like, there's a lot of opportunity there. Well, as you do a good job and as you meet the needs of the people in your community, more and more people come to you with tons of opportunity. And this is why power centralizes at the top, because the opportunities go to the people who can deliver and who have shown that they can do it over a period of time. And so what you have to do is you have to get rid of how many things you're doing, and you take less and less things, but you ultimately end up with a teeny tiny number of things you're doing. And you have to do that at the exclusion of all of these opportunities at the top. And so the more, again, I don't like the word successful, but there's not really a Christian way to say that. The more needs you're meeting in your community with your ministry, and the more effectively you're blessing people, the more opportunities are going to come to you, but you're going to realize you need to take less and less of those opportunities. And so it comes down to, how do you make the decision on which opportunities to cut? Because, that has some pretty dramatic impacts. Does that make sense, Pastor Karen? I haven't quite explained that one yet. Any questions on how that works, or any clarity I can add?
No, that's totally making sense to me.
Okay. So basically, and again, success, not my favorite word because it's kind of secular in nature, but the more successful we become in a kingdom way, the more opportunities we're going to have to cut. And if we want to make the biggest impact that we can on the kingdom, what do you want to say? Jesus is pruning the vine, and obviously that's in regard to people. He's pruning the vine and he's throwing them into the fire. Well, that's the same thing that we do when we make decisions. We prune our vine, except we're fallible. And I would love to not cut off the vine full of fruit and chuck that in the fire, because then I'm going to have to explain to Jesus why I threw all the fruit in the fire. And then I did a bunch of work and got no fruit, and it's not a salvational issue, but I also don't want to have that conversation, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So moving on from that, and we'll get into some of these models. And I am going to be drawing because these are, I think, more easily understood in pen form. Um, so the first kind of point here is on the necessity of pruning the vine. Now, this has to do with what's called a fallacy of thought. And all of this is, again, just kind of based in logic. God can supersede anything. He can work a miracle in any way, and all that's good and well. But generally, according to natural revelation and how God created the systems, I'm teaching on the rules of the world. We're in the world. We're not of the world, but we're in the world. And so this is how to logically function in that world. Um, and so the first thing is many ministry leaders think the more things you do, the more effective your ministry is going to be, the more people you're going to reach. And that's very backwards. I guess it's very forwards. And it is based on what's called a linear view of reality. And that is things just scale at a rate that is linear. And linear being, if this is a graph, here we go. I'm doing a little things, I'm getting a little results, and I'm doing a little more things, and I'm getting a little more results. And it sort of increases on a straight line, more effort, more results. And that's not how this works at all. The more things you do, you will get more results until you hit sort of a what's called a point of diminishing returns. And so, you're going to come here and you're going to do more things, but then you're going to start hitting the edge of these resources. And the more things you do, you start becoming exhausted, you start burning out, and then you're going to hit this sort of point of diminishing returns and it's going to come down. So what you want to do is you want to find where is that point at which I'm doing the most things and getting the best results. And now we have to transition into new strategies. And those are going to be strategies for optimizing. And you can really only work three ways. You can work harder, smarter, and longer. And so when we're talking about harder and longer, that's doing more things for more people. You're just grinding it out. And pastors are really high performance people. At the same time, they really think in an academic way, in the sense that you just go to work and follow the rules, and we don't question the systems, we don't question the tactics or the methods. It just is the way that it is. So just work longer, just work harder, and then they hit the edge of what their resources can handle personally and in ministry, and then they just kind of drop off an edge. And this is also kind of implicit in the church life cycle, which we've looked at as well. So the necessity of pruning in regard to that opportunities, well, you're doing more and more things and you're getting more results, but you're hitting this top. So what do we have to do? We then go back and look and say, okay, if there are 10, and I'm going to draw 10 ministries, and this is one example, and this is an example of optimizing our ministry and its effect with what's called the 80-20 principle. And this is called a mental model. We briefly talked about these here and there, but this is kind of the focus as we move forward. And what this is it's basically like a map. Reality looks a certain way, and a map is supposed to help you know where you're at in the real world and then help you decide, should I go left or right to get to my destination? And that's why we talked with strategy first, because we got to know where we're going. But then these models help us to understand, how do we make those decisions if we're in a position in our relationship with God and our ministry to make a logical decision and not just, do what God said, because that's always first. Is it biblical? Is God telling me to do something illogical? Obviously, we just do what God tells us if we know for sure that's where that's going. But if it's like, hey, you make your own decision, then this is a great place to begin with the logical decision. So 80-20 says, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so let's say we have 10 ministries at our church, because what were we doing? Or in our business, 10 services. What were we doing? We said, well, the more things I offer, the more results I get. And we believed that. And people are exhausted, and but now, we're having that toxic cycle where there's too many things, and volunteers are getting tired and they're not showing up, and pastors getting tired because the volunteers aren't doing their part, whatever it is. What the 80-20 principle says is that 20% of your effort, so that would be your resources, 20% of your time, 20% of your energy, decisions, whatever the resources are you're using. So there's 10 of these. These two produce 80% of your growth. And this is called the Pareto principle. This is broadly applicable everywhere in the world. It doesn't matter what you look at. I do this with clients. If I have to reduce the time that I'm spending working because I have too many problems, what I know is that 20% of my clients create 80% of my problems. So there is a very disproportionate way in which different people affect your ministry. Your 20% of your congregants create 80% of your stress. You know, you probably think of a name right now, at least one. Coming over here, the other 80%, so all of these are going to create, and I'm just going to try to give me one of those. That's not very pretty. Create 20% of the fruit that your ministry produces. Okay, so step one is we are exhausting our resources, and we did get growth by doing more things to help more people. But now that we're at the edge of our resources, we cannot allocate any more resources without falling off of the exhaustion burnout cliff. And so what do? We say, let's look at, firstly, define the fruit. What is it we're looking for? What's the vision? Where are we going? Okay, well, we want more people coming into the church on Sunday. All right. Now let's go and figure out through surveys or whatever, what are the one or two or three things we're doing that are bringing 80% of new people into the service. And then what do? You go to all of the other things that you're doing and you eliminate them immediately. You just chop them off. One-way ministries can do that because sometimes that can be very uncomfortable for congregants, especially people are very comfortable with kind of just status quo. You slowly starve them out. You starve them of resources. You say, well, you know, we're still going to keep it going. The budget's just, you know, we have to focus this over here a little more, and you stop putting it in the announcements as much, and people sort of phase it out over time. That's another way you can do that. I'm a little bit more brutal. I just like cutting things, but I'm also relatively small operation, so I can do that. Either way. So then you have 80%. So if you're talking like A+ in college, forgive me, I have what appears to be some kind of urgent situation. Let me just make sure nothing's exploding.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, we're fine. Great. Okay. So then what happens is we've done all this work to create all these results because the more work I do, the more results I get. Well, we're here, and this is the next logical solution if we continue to scale the same way. And we'll call this like A+. You know, we've got all the results for all the work we can do. That is a win. Now, what do? Well, we're going to cut 80% of our resource drain that's producing 20% of the growth. So what does that look like? Well, it's going to bump us back here in regard to growth. So we'll call it a B. All right. Well, that's not a very good B. Anyway, we'll call it a B. And so you go back to having 80% of the growth. So you lost 20%. And what happens initially is ministry leaders are like, oh my gosh, no, we can't go backwards. We've worked so hard and all this. And that's all relevant. However, what happens is you get to keep 80%, but now you also have all of these resources here freed up. So you've got 80% of your growth, and now you've got 80% more resources to spend. That's a big zero. I got to get better at this. 80% more resources to spend. So what does that look like? Now, this from 0 to B, that's 20% of your resources. And so what can you do with another 80%? You can get up here now, somewhere like that. And so it is non-linear in the way in which altering the way you think about ministry and how to use those resources works. And the reason why you can get all the way up here with these extra 80%, you cut the 80% of things you're doing that are giving you 20% of the growth. What do you do with these? all these resources, the time, the energy, the money, the attention, the volunteers you're putting into this stuff that wasn't really giving you any growth, you take this 80% and you go invest it in the stuff that's getting you the biggest return. And now the growth that you can receive is exponentially higher because you're putting the resources into the things that have proven to be effective. And this, in a biblical format, is just you have 4 soils, you have a bunch of seed, and you put, what does this come out to be? 3, 3, and 3, like 2.5 seeds on the good soil and 2.5 seeds on the rocky soil, and 2.5, and so you spread it out, and then you realize, oh, this 75%, this 80% doesn't produce good fruit. So what do? You just, next season, you take all the seeds and you put it on the good soil that does produce good fruit. And now you've optimized your fruit. And so one thing the Bible says is, what one man plants and other waters, but God provides the growth. Well, that's true. God provides the growth and God decides which seed grows. I don't get to pick which person's going to accept Christ. That's between them and God. But if I know that this area of town, every time I go there, I get way better results than this area of town or this audience, because for whatever reason, my message just resonates with these people and they can hear it. Well, God's going to provide the growth individually. Only 80% are going to accept, but statistically, 80% are going to accept. So of course I should allocate the time there, because for whatever reason, that's where God is providing for my ministry. Does that kind of make sense into how that works? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then the way that works is, and this is how that growth works, and this is how you scale a ministry. And this is, again, only one of these models. So I'm just kind of breaking down how a mental model works. So then you take this 20%. So you cut out all this stuff that doesn't work, and you just looked at the data. You looked at where the people are coming from. Well, how'd you hear about us? This is why they ask. Okay. You take these two, and then, so I'm blowing up these two. Okay. So we've got those 2 things, but now those 2 things are going to have all, all 10 of your resources. So that little circle becomes the new 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So all of your 10 resources, they're no longer going into this stuff that didn't work. It's now going into the thing that works better, but it acts like a magnifying glass, because now I've got more data and more results and people are like, I really love both of these, but I don't like this part of that thing. And so then what do we do again? We just go back through the same circle. And that's those sort of triangles that I'm talking about at the beginning. You get further and further up, but you continue to cut out the bad soil until whatever you're doing is hyper effective. And what's really cool is the whole time it's taking less and less effort and energy and time, and it's just more meeting the need through feedback, because people are just telling you, oh, yeah, you put all the resources into these 2 things, and then you kind of blew those 2 things up only to these things, right? So more, 5 and 5 is those 2, cut that down the middle. And so you've got the one thing, and then you've got the other thing, and you've got more resources in here. But within those 2 things, some things will work and some things won't. And then you can reallocate that 80% again and again and again. So the number of things you do gets less and less and less, but the results you get gets higher and higher and higher. Does that make sense how that works?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so that is, I think, something that I have yet to meet a ministry leader or a pastor that really understands. It's very counterintuitive how that works, but this is how, and again, I'm speaking of secular people, but this is how you have that sort of like wealthy guy and gal that are in. What did I do? I went to the Four Seasons one time. It was made me really uncomfortable. I didn't like it, but it's just like a bunch of uber rich people and kids with shirts made out of material that I don't even know what it's called because it's fancy. It's like $1,000 shirt. I looked up some of the brands after we left, and I was like, "You're kidding me!" My gosh, my kid is no. They're getting thrift store clothes. They can. I know. I'm just kidding. Um, but yeah, and they're just sitting around and they're doing nothing all day. Why? Because they have operated this kind of system. And what do? all they do is make decisions. They just have to sit by the pool and think about a really hard decision and run it through how they understand the world to work. They make it, they take a couple calls and they tell a couple people what to do, and those people execute it. And that's their whole job. And they get paid the most to just make decisions because they have removed all of the noise and all of the clutter until only the most effective things are left. And then they have also allocated work to other people, and so they just make decisions and make phone calls. And and as ClickMill has grown and we have interns and we have some employees, it's really weird because my job is also becoming more like that. I train because I love it, and besides that, I give away most of the work, which is so cool. And there are times when I'm actually kind of stressed and I've got a tough decision, and I actually just go over to the pool where I can see the mountains and it's calm and it's quiet, and I just kind of think and pray and come to some decisions. And it's the weirdest thing, but this is why this happens. And so you can have a hugely effective ministry. And I don't just mean that in regard to congregation size, but in depth, whatever it is, and ease your workload tremendously. Any thoughts or questions on this before we move on?
Yeah, I feel like this is what I've lived, honestly. Like being in ministry for 12 years in one context, I definitely got to that A plus, and then we saw it start to go down, and then COVID hit, which forced us to go to that
You don't have a choice.
20%.
Yeah.
But what I do recognize is that through COVID, I was able to go to massive action because it was kind of like, what are we going to do to meet the
You didn't
needs?
have an option, and the timeline was when I remember COVID, I had like dozens of ministries just calling us and saying we have to have live online tomorrow, and they're
Absolutely. Yeah.
freaking out. Yeah, and what happens is the complexity of the for some reason our mind increases complexity with the amount of time we have. Well, ministries have forever. We don't have deadlines. We don't have clients saying you have to deliver now. And so everything is very complex. But what happens is if you just say, we've got 14 days to get this done, and that's just because that's the deadline, oh, the board talked and that's the deadline, and you can just reference that, suddenly it becomes so easy and it just happens. It's not perfect, but it gets results. Also, Karen, something I talk to ministry leaders about is I will tell them, because I think ministry leaders don't really understand business. How do they grow so fast and then maintain it over such a long period of time when so many ministry leaders have, what do you want to even say, like an actually generous heart? It's not about the money. It's about the kingdom. But how do they get this growth? And the answer is during COVID. I talk to ministry leaders. I say, do you remember during COVID? Do you remember how high stress it was and how you were taking just massive action? And you know what? Maybe something blows up, but you don't have an option. That's how, especially startups, but that's generally how small to mid-sized business operate every single day of the week, 6 days a week, 7 days a week. And because not only if you don't meet the need of your audience, are they just going to dump you and then you don't have dinner on the table, but all of your competitors are actively trying to do better than you. So you have to do better than them, faster than them, or you're out. And this is even more true with like artificial intelligence. There are already like 3 or 4 industries that are gone that nobody even realized are gone because these AI tools are picking up so quickly. So you've got to be moving fast. And that's how they operate all the time. And then it's like, oh my gosh, what do you mean? We operate like that all the time? Well, you operate like that all the time sustainably, because you can burn out functioning like that the way pastors do, but the way really high functioning like entrepreneurial teams run that, you can sustain that if you set it up properly. And that's kind of what I'm looking at, is how do you marry the two? You've got high performing pastors, but how do you marry that with high performing with effectiveness and not burning out? Because we got to win, we got to finish the race to get the crown of life, and that kind of broadens that out, if that makes sense. We want to finish the race in ministry if that's what we're called to as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So with that the 2 ministries that then become the 10.
The 10 become the 2.
Yeah. Right. Um, do the lay people take on more of that ministry, which then allows the minister to do other stuff in that concept, or?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, with ClickMill, we do, let's like in regard to marketing, but like we're a marketing firm. And I have lots of friends in Christian marketing and they don't understand these concepts. And with their agencies, they market on YouTube, they market on Twitter, they market on Pinterest, they market on TikTok, they market on Facebook, they do, it's like, I don't even know how they keep up with it. It blows my mind. What I know is that there's one or two outlets that's going to work really good. And I only use two. I don't care. I tried Facebook for a little while. I tried Twitter. I tried whatever the different areas, whatever they are. I don't even like social media, but we tried them. Doesn't really bring anybody in for us specifically, our audience, but just that's not what they're looking for. But what works really, really well with my personality and with our audience is YouTube and blogs. And that makes sense because generally ministry leaders are, fairly highly educated, bachelor's, master's, PhD. And what are they looking for? They're looking for fairly put together content. And so that's a blog, that's a YouTube video that's 10 minutes long, and they can really learn and get an answer. It's not really like a 30-second TikTok. It's just not really a thing that seems to work. So what do? I only do those two things. And people are like, I have interns ask me, well, do you have a social meeting? I'm like, no, not really. Well, why not? Because it's a waste of resources. I'd rather put you on something that produces fruit than doesn't. And it's not to say that I wouldn't be, if there's a new one, I'd try it and see if the results are there. And if it's better than what we're doing, we're going to keep it and cut something else. If it's not, then it's gone. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. And that's what we do with our programs. That's what we do with, frankly, staff, unfortunately. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not about like firing people. I want to hire people this day for a long time. At the same time, if you're giving the at least financial resources and training resources to people in your ministry, and despite their efforts and reallocating their attention and their focus to different projects, if they do not have the capacity to create fruit, I mean, I'm going to meet Jesus and I'm going to have to give him an account of where all those resources went. And I like over here Pastor Phil, but Pastor Phil can't produce a result. That's the problem, so I know that's touchy and that's really hard, but that's also resource allocation.
Mm-hmm.
um any other questions or thoughts on that?
No, that's great.
Okay, so let's look at another way in which we can optimize. And so what you'll notice is all of these are ways to cut from different perspectives. So this was cutting from an 80-20 perspective. All right, so we're going to cut from a different perspective now. And this is called batching. Are you familiar at all with batching?
Nope.
Okay, so batching is a very simple mental model that says there's a setup cost for everything. And this is true neurologically. This is true in business. It's true in ministry. Okay, so mentally, multitasking is impossible. That's a myth. There's no such thing as multitasking. What happens neurologically is you have one stream of consciousness. Nobody splits their consciousness and can focus on two things at once. What happens is we can rapidly shift back and forth between two thoughts or ideas. So if I'm watching a YouTube video over here on biblical archaeology and I'm trying to focus on a client account, what happens in my mind is my electrical signals going through my neurons will access one sort of pack of proteins, which is where your memories are stored. And it will be functioning in marketing. But then as soon as I have to refocus, because I hear something that grabs my attention, that part shuts down. And then my brain has to reset and send new signals to a different part of my brain and then reactivate, biblical archaeology over here. I've been watching some videos that are just really amazing. But anyway, and here's my brain shifting back over. And then I'm thinking about biblical archaeology. I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. And then I have to go through that couple second reset shift back over to the other thing. And, it's quick. And some people are faster than others. But what is shown is that if you're doing more than one thing at a time, the length of time it takes you to accomplish anything dramatically extends. And not only that, the proficiency with which you accomplish the task is lower, the work is worse. And so the way in which we can see this in maybe a more practical everyday scenario would be like t-shirts. Your church is printing t-shirts and you order one t-shirt and it's $50, but you order 1,000 and they're like a nickel each. Why does that happen? It's because there is a batching cost on the front end. Someone has to go into a machine shop and set up a printer to do a thing and stamp the thing in a certain way. And if you set that up one time, you have to lump that whole setup cost into one t-shirt. But if you do it 1,000 times, the setup cost is between 1,000 t-shirts, and that's where you get bulk pricing. And so when you do a thing, you want to do it in bulk, in batch, if you can. And so, for example, at home, if my wife's doing meal prep, don't meal prep every day if you can avoid it. If you can meal prep for 3 days, do it all at the same time, get it all done because you got everything out, you've got everything prepared. You don't have to. What's the batching there? You got to get out all the things. You got to get out all the packages. You've got to get out all the, I don't know, the Tupperwares or whatever it is. I don't do meal prep, but you get out all the things and then you put them all back. Well, why would you do that 3 times if you could just do it one time? You'll save time. So the more of the work you can do in one setup will actually extend the distance between, like, instead of a B here, the B would actually be like up here, because instead of losing this amount of time and resources with setup and teardown and setup and teardown to do the same task, you just set it up once, put some extra time in. It's usually kind of inconvenient and boring, but you get to move the needle a little further because you're saving that batching cost. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts or questions on that?
No, that totally fits.
Okay. So that is batching. And we're going to do another one. I'm kind of picking randomly off the list, but we'll hit them. We already kind of talked about ruthless elimination. That goes in line with the 80-20. If it doesn't work, just get rid of it. And that seems very biblical in regard to how Christ prunes the vine of believers, which is, continue to work out your faith with fear and trembling, because boy, that one gets me. I don't want to be on the wrong side of that knife. And then we've talked about 80-20. So we've addressed that. We just addressed batching. And now one that what did I just say? Okay, this is one that also more refines the impact of your resources. Okay. And this is called a locus of control. And now one of the things that I want to point out is that these models that we're looking at for decision-making come from all over the natural world. Some of these are going to come from chemistry. Some of these, in this case, are coming from psychology, and like 80-20, I think that's mathematics. Second order thinking is from the study of strategy. And so what we're doing is we're getting the best ideas from each part of God's creation, and we're getting to pick and choose which of those we use in making the best. And that makes sense because God made the whole world. It's all one thing. Yeah, it's really complex, but we can take the best parts of it to help to refine and make godly decisions. So either way. So coming over here, this is called a locus of control. Have you ever heard of a locus of control?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So in a locus of control, oh, I don't like that. That's supposed to be in the middle. Don't do that. It's got to at least look kind of right. Let's see. See if I can. All right, we're going to pretend it's in the middle. And then this is also very centered. Okay, so out here is no control, and that's white. I don't know why that's okay. No control. And in here, this would be something like influence. And in here, this is control. Okay. Now, this is very relevant to anxiety specifically. People who focus on things they cannot control have a lot of anxiety because it's out of control. So, there is a correlation between watching the news, the amount of news you watch, and the amount of anxiety you feel. I know someone who just lives watching the news all of the time, and they're a very anxious person because
Mhm.
there's nothing they can do about the world that is just constantly falling apart. And of course, they spin it's all worse than it really is, but whatever. So there's things that are no control. There are things you can influence, like the people in your ministry. You can influence them. You can offer them things to engage, and you can influence it. And then there are things you can directly control, which is like you and the staff, something to that effect. And
Mhm.
so the way in which you optimize your resources is by making 100% sure it is only going to things that are at least within your influence and definitely within your control. Um, and it sounds obvious, but a lot of people focus on things that are outside. They have no control over it. And then and I wouldn't say they invest resources, they waste resources on those things. And this is also, think about this. When you are, and this makes actually, I haven't ever quite thought about it like this, but I really like this. Where is the no control in your ministry? Well, it's outside your ministry, it's the masses. They're not committed. They don't know you. They don't care about you. And what do? We go take our resources and we go give it to the people that we have not even any influence over, really. And now that is, I would say the exception to that is when you're going to a very specific strategic audience, your target audience, single mothers, where are you going to them in the daycare and you make a win-win-win deal? Hey, daycare, what do you need? What's your biggest problem? I'm like, well, we need more clients. Oh, awesome. Well, what if we helped you add value to your current clients? It's like, well, okay, what's that? We want to give you gift baskets for every single mom, and we want to give them, we're hiring a massage therapist to come in, and we're going to do a whatever type of single moms night where we're going to encourage them. We're going to whatever it is you're going to do to meet those ladies' needs, and we want to give that to you, and you provide it for us through your establishment because that's where all the single moms are. Well, you go to 15 of those in your town, someone's going to say yes. Who doesn't want to give their clients free gift baskets that are worth $100 each or something? And then what? Now you've got a handwritten note from one of the people in your ministry inviting them personally to come, and there's a phone number to call. And so now what are you doing? Well, you're targeting your resources to meet a very specific need of a very niche audience outside the ministry. That is actually expanding your circle of influence. So it's not relevant in that case, but just going to everybody and doing everything, that's no control. That's the masses in the way I'm referring to it. And that would be an example of that. Now, who do you have influence over? Well, you have influence over people you're ministering to and people in your congregation and those types of things. So you can kind of see the overlap here. Um, and so in regard to the application of this, there's a secular business guy that I really have read a lot of. His name's Robert Kiyosaki. He's a real estate mogul, basically. And one of the things that he talks about in regard to allocating your resources is always, his rule is always prioritize the financial investments that you control. So he goes, I don't like stocks, I don't like bonds, I don't like mutual funds, all this stuff, because somebody else decides what happens with that. Somebody else chooses and makes the decisions for, Walmart, and they could tank it tomorrow and I can do nothing about it. So it's not that it's not a good investment. He just goes, I want to have more control over where it goes. And the stipulation to that, and this would be my critique of that, is if you don't want to learn how to manage a business, if you don't want to learn how to manage a ministry, if you don't want to learn all the things that are necessary to make the wise decisions to grow a thing, then yeah, give it to Walmart, put it in the S&P 500, invest it in something. And that makes total sense for just the person who's not really interested in doing that and they just want it to passively grow. That's, it's a pretty safe bet. But if you want to maximize your return and you want to learn, and this is your skill, this is what you do, then, I'm Pastor Karen. I'm highly experienced. I know how to control the resources in the ministry and make the decisions. So all the resources are going to stay here and I'm going to grow what God's given me faster than, let's just say, I don't know, investing it in the stock market or something like that. And that's the way I think about it here at ClickMill. you know, uh, I'm not personally terribly concerned with a retirement fund because I'm young, and the returns that we get here at ClickMill and in our other businesses are much higher than I would get in a mutual fund. And that is a much better use of my finances, at least during this point in my life, because I have more control, and I know that I can generate higher returns personally than I'm going to get somewhere else where someone else is in control. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, so that would be use, and that's true psychologically. That can help reduce anxiety. You know, we have foster kids, and we really want to adopt them. They're wonderful kids, and we have no control over CPS. I have no control over judges. I have no control over, you know, who even knows, a whole bunch of stuff, and that has created a lot of anxiety. And I have to reassess my own ability to function at a high level. It goes down when I start worrying about what those people are going to do, because there's nothing I can do about it. And those are the things that we submit to God, and then we take ownership and the control that God allows us to have over the things we influence and we control. So not only is it good for mental health, it also has directly to do with our relationship with God, especially in the no control area. And then, of course, we submit all of these things to God, and then we take the action that we feel that we can take in our relationship with Him. So that brings us to I don't know where my pointer is, a draw. That brings us to, okay, go away, locus of control here. So we've gone over about 4 of those today. Any questions on any of those?
No, no, they all are making sense. It's really intriguing, and I can see how I make decisions based on these models and can think of examples within my ministry. So yeah, it's great.
That's awesome. Good. Maybe some confirmation in some of this. And I think the most important thing, and this is something I've really been putting a lot of thought into, because I'm planning on filming a course, and I'm sure this will also be included in that. Okay, so what do you want to say? And I want to say this maybe really specifically and clearly. Christians will a lot of times give all the control and all the decisions over to Jesus, because just trust in the Lord.
Yeah.
And that's where we get into kind of the hyper faith and the hyper spiritual. And that doesn't fit with quite what we see in scripture. Do we need to have faith? Yeah. Can God work miracles? 100%. Let's pray for him. Let's pray for revival and hope for it and have faith and all this stuff. But he also gave us a mind to make decisions, unlike all of the creatures in the world. And he gave us the ability to execute those decisions. And he says, go and be fruitful and multiply and take dominion over the earth. He didn't say, ask me to help you take dominion over the earth. He said, go take dominion over, go do the thing that you're supposed to do, whatever that is. So the secular person over on, like, you know, Robert Kiyosaki and all these super mogul people, they have 100% responsibility to execute in their own capability, because they don't have God. So it's all on them. And they are just fighting reality and using all these rules as best they can, but there's no God helping them. So on one side, you've got give it all to God and do nothing. And on the other side, I'm going to do it all by myself. And I think on the all by myself side, there's a book by a guy named T. Harv Eker, I think called The Millionaire Mind. And what he says is, and this is a really fascinating take, because you can see the religion right in it. He says, if you want to be rich, and again, I know money's not our point, but he's talking about success or results, so similar. But he says, if you want to be rich, you have to decide to be rich. And when you decide to be rich, you have to decide to do whatever it takes to get there. And so he's talking about sacrifice, right? And the Bible says, if your eye causes you to sin, cut it off. This is what he's talking about, but for the idol of money. And so what he says is, whatever you want to do, you have to, if you want to be wealthy, you have to do whatever it takes. And if that means cutting friends out because they're holding you back, get rid of them. If it means working 18-hour days, get over it. Like, this is just what's required. And that is how the secular people get the wealth. But what good is it to gain the whole world if you lose your soul? That's the tipping point there. And so how do we balance it? It's a partnership. And I know we've talked about this. And so the decision-making process, is best I can understand it thus far, is number one, God, is this a situation where you're going to tell me what to do and I'm going to be the sheep and I'm going to say no problem? Or is it a situation where you're giving me the permission to take the reins here and make the best assessment I can? And you decide that first. And if you really feel a strong conviction that God is telling you to do something that doesn't make sense, I mean, hey, that happens. And so, in that sense, it's more of the faith. And I think we assess the faith first. And of course, how do we ground the faith? Well, not really through all of these reasoning methods necessarily, but definitely, is the thing I feel very convicted to do biblical? And then, of course, we can assess it for wisdom with other people around us and confirmation in a spiritual sense. So we can kind of assess that decision on a spiritual front. And that I don't really focus on that a lot because most pastors usually know how to do that. But in relation to these more logical decision making methods, it's like, okay, so I know that I'm supposed to sort of like, I don't know, marry a believer. Well, God's pretty much, unless there's something specific he calls you to and you know it, like Earl next door who's 30 years older than you, it's like, wait a minute. Are you, okay, pray about it. Like you need to be sure if that's the thing you're doing in faith, but if that's it, then do it. On the other hand, if it's like, okay, I need to marry a believer, well, you got a billion options. So we need to have some models to start whittling down because one believer is not the same as another believer. There's different denominations. There's nominal Christians and Christians that are really living their faith. You've got Christians that are addicted to, crack cocaine and people who can live a functional life. We should probably figure out how to narrow this down and make the best godly decision because we've got good decisions and then we have the best good decisions. And we want to make as much as we can, to the degree that God enables us to consider these things, we want to make the best good decision with our ministries and with our lives. And so that is the basic process. First, is it faith or is it a reasoned decision? And if it's faith and God's telling us to do something, crazy, great. Is it biblical? Run through the spiritual ways you would test a faith decision. If it's a reasoned decision, then you run through the reason and we partner with God in the decisions. And what's so cool in my experience is I always leaned more to the do it in your own work side, just because that's what I started with and I'm more analytical. And I have found that God has slowed me down and said, nope, you're going to do it with me and you're going to wait. And you're not going to be successful and it's going to take a long time because you got a thick head and you're going to wait. Well, what happens is as soon as I chill out and I wait, God will just give it to me outside of my own ability. And so for me, God's like, no, you don't get to be like the secular people who do it completely by themselves. And not only that, I'm not going to let it work yet. You're going to learn to do it with me. And when you get the lesson, then it just shows up. And I mean that literally in a miraculous sense. So God works the miraculous in my life to show me it's not in my own power. Well, God will sometimes not work the miraculous in the ministry leader's life to show them that they need to make the decisions. And so he wants to balance us in the middle. Well, in my own life, I tried to start like 5 businesses, and we'll end here, Pastor Karen, because I know we're going a little over. I tried to start like 5 businesses. I built basically an Amazon where Christian shops and e-commerce websites could make profiles and sell products, and I was going to make a Christian version of Amazon that would allow users to filter which stores donated the most money to charitable organizations and give different strategies to incentivize, what do you want to say, basically Christian business. And I tried to start a pastor finding website and lost $5,000 to a web designer who didn't actually do it because I didn't know what web design was at the time. And that led me into building a website. But I was just trying to do everything in my own power and moved back to Florida after having been in youth ministry for 3 years. And I was just really exhausted from ministry. And I just felt like God was just saying, go get a job, go work at this place and do sales. And I'm like, what are you talking? No, I want to start a business. I know I'm supposed to be an entrepreneur. I know I'm supposed to be working with pastors somehow and I'm being on the internet and doing all this stuff. And I'm just keep feeling, and I'm not like the person who's saying he's talking to God all the time. And I like hearing, but I just had this conviction and confirmation. And it's like, go work at the furniture store and sell furniture. And I did that for 1.5 years and I was not happy about it, but I was like, fine, I'll quit And I just totally stopped trying to start businesses. And one night, like a year and a half or 2 years after I was working at this furniture store, turns out I got into sales to do what I do. Who knew? Not me. But a year and a half in, I'm in my kitchen at 10 o'clock at night making eggs for my wife and I. And my phone rings, I answer it, and it's some guy, and he's like, "Hey, it's Dylan." And I'm like, "Who's Dylan?" And he's like, "Oh, we met that one time when we were moving out of your apartment. I lived in a church apartment building. We volunteered a lot with our church, and so they gave us volunteer housing, which was a cool perk." But yeah, he moved out and we moved in, and I passed him like a year and a half or 2 years earlier. And right about the same time I got the job. And we discussed a business book called The 4 Hour Work Week. And that was it, like 10 minutes. He's like, "Man, it took me forever to find your number. I've been calling everybody over there," because he moved to Michigan and I was in Florida. And I'm like, "Okay, like, what can I do for you, Dylan?" He's like, "Yeah, my partner Mitch and I, we started a business, and we're done with it. And I'm either going to shut it down or I'm going to give it to somebody. It's called ClickMill. And do you want it?" And I was like, "I don't understand. What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, it's kind of tough. You know, basically, you sign up for these advertising grants for churches, and you do marketing, you run these, you send a lot of people to church, and we're moving on." And I'm like, "Well, what's the catch?" He's like, "Oh man," he's like, "I'll just be honest with you. You have to work with pastors." And this is a Christian, and I've had a lot of Christian business people stop working with churches because pastors can be very difficult to work with. But he's like, "Yeah, it's you got to work with pastors, you got to work online, and it's just it's a tough gig." But we started our own marketing firm. We're just moving over to secular businesses, man. And it's like I totally get it if you don't want it because it's hard. And I'm over here and I'm like, that's what I've been like, wait, I've been praying about this. I've been trying to start this my whole life. And it's like, you're okay. Yeah. I don't know how to do that though. How do I run a Google grant? How do I run paid advertising and marketing? And he's like, "Oh, no problem. We'll train you." He's like, "Just show up to this Zoom call on Monday. You can work for us and we'll train you how to do it. And you can just get clients as you go and phase out." And so I worked for them for like 2 or 2.5 years, learned how to do all the digital marketing. They trained me how to do it. And I transitioned out into ClickMail as I was able to build up the client base, So uh, in regard to the decision-making models, there is a miraculous side, and then there is also a logical side. I was very faith side, but we're doing it with God. And so I was very light in the faith and the miraculous side. And a lot of ministry leaders are overly heavy on that side, and they need to get kind of weighted down in the decision-making process. And then we partner those things. And that is what enables us to outperform the world, because we have the miraculous push of God when we need it. And then we also have the best decision-making that we can find in the world, because we're in the world, not of the world. And we're shrewd as a serpent and also innocent as a dove. And so that's the core of the decision-making model. And that's what I've got for today. We'll go into some more of these next week. Do you have any questions or anything before we wrap it up?
No, I love it. It's great.
Sweet. All right, Pastor Karen, it's such a pleasure. If you want, you're welcome to make an account on the back end of ClickMill. And I want to open all that up to you. You're obviously the first person in the program, and I want to open that up to you, and you can beta test any of that stuff if you want. Apologetics courses going in there, just a lot of stuff I'm going to start just dumping in there on the back end topically. So decision making, and then of course digital marketing training. I've got a year and a half or 2 years of training with interns. I'm going to start linking into the back of that. YouTube, social media, all this stuff. It's very different than I think a lot of pastors think it is, and we'll get there with you and I, but that's going to be in there as well. So I don't know does that sound like that's a value add to you, or is that something that's not really interesting?
Totally interested.
Okay, cool. Well, why don't you do this? Go over to ClickMail, click the Get My Account button, and I'll figure out how to change your subscription to the top level. The mid level's 50, the top level's 100, but I want you just to have access, and I'm trying to get comments enabled. I'm working with some developers right now. So hopefully by tomorrow that's live, and you can leave comments with things you like and things you think could be better. And like I said, move fast, massive action, make mistakes. They're going to be filmed like this. It's not going to be super edited. I'm going to get the feedback from people with what information they like and don't like. And then over time, I'll be refilming a lot of it to solidify the content into something more fancy. But on the
Cool.
front end, it's like, you know, let's get the content and get the stuff that helps. So anyway, that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thanks again.
You got it. Have a great day. God bless.
Yeah, you too.
You
Bye.
bet. Michael, brother.